So this set of videos is going to be about the lymphatic system and the immune system. So we want to learn the functions of lymph and immune, how lymph is formed, and then we're also going to talk about, in the next set of videos, immunity. Okay, so the function of the lymphatic system is basically to assist the cardiovascular system. So what it's going to do is it's going to actually absorb excess interstitial fluid. So any fluid that's collecting in the tissue, hopefully it'll get picked up by the lymph, and then eventually the lymph system is going to return it to the bloodstream, okay, to the cardiovascular system. So the second function is the lacteals. These are found in the intestines, in the small intestines. And they serve as a point of entry where we actually absorb the liquids, or the lipids. Okay, so now, so the lacteals are where we're going to absorb lipids. Okay, now, the lymphatic system also is going to be important in immune function. So it assists the immune system. So the bone marrow and the thymus are going to form lymphocytes, which are a type of white blood cell. The lymph nodes, the spleen, the tonsils, and the malt, which is mucus or mucosa associated lymphatic tissue, okay, is where the lymphocytes actually live. And then the lymphatic system will also help circulate some of the molecules or the chemicals that the immune system produces. Okay, so what is lymph? Okay, so lymph basically, it's kind of like plasma. Okay, so it's water, ions, a little bit of protein, sometimes break down parts of the cells, so cell debris, pathogens that we're trying to get rid of, and cancer cells that we're trying to get rid of, okay, or that sometimes we can't get rid of them, right? Okay, so that's what lymph is. So it's fluid. Usually on pictures we make it look green, or like it's like a light green on pictures is what we tend to, how we tend to represent it. Okay, now lymphatic capillaries, they're closed-ended vessels, okay, so they're like this. They're not like arteries or veins where they connect by capillaries. The ends of them close. Okay, they go through areolar tissue, and they have these epithelial cells that line them that are big, and they kind of overlap. They're kind of like veins. Okay, now what's going to happen is they do have valves. Okay, so the valves are there to prevent backflow. I now have this on another picture. They have valves, and these overlapping cells, what they're going to do is they're going to allow, if there's fluid out here, so let's pretend this is like interstitial fluid. Okay, it's going to allow the fluid to move in between the cells. Okay, and then it can't go back out. It can't leave, so it can go in that way, and then the lymph fluid, okay, is going to move back towards the heart is how it'll travel. Okay, so lymphatic capillaries. So here's what I just tried to show you. Okay, so here's the epithelial cells. Okay, and they're big and they overlap. Okay, so here's where they're overlapping. Okay, so out here's the interstitial fluid is out here. Okay, then what happens, okay, the lymph vessels are anchored, okay, so they're not flopping around. And the fluid can move, if we look at this, the fluid's going to move in. Okay, so they're going to move from where the pressure's high, okay, to where the pressure's low. So they're going to move in like this. Okay, now, how does it move back? So how does it move? Okay, so here's blood vessels. Okay, so the red and the blue are the blood vessels. Okay, and then here's the lymph. So the lymph is just close-ended like this. So we're just going to pick up fluid, okay, and we're going to filter it through the lymph nodes. Okay, so they're almost like a water filter. okay? We filter it through lymph nodes, and it's going to get filtered through lots and lots of nodes, okay? So get filtered through the lymph nodes, and then it ends up dumping in, okay, to the subclavian vein. Okay, so the idea is we're going to clean the lymph by filtering it, okay, until we can dump it back into the bloodstream. So on here, this picture is showing, where the big lymph vessels are and where big clumps of lymph nodes are. Okay, so you can feel the lymph nodes. Like if you have an infection, the lymph nodes will swell and get enlarged. So you can feel them under your armpits. You can feel them under your jaw, in your groin. Okay, sometimes you can feel them on legs, back of heads. They're all over the place. Okay, so collecting ducts. These are the big ducts that are going to drain the lymph back into the bloodstream. Okay, and it's kind of weird the way it's divided up because it's not symmetrical. So the right lymphatic duct is coming from the right arm, the right side of the head. So every place that's purple on here, this is the right. The thorax, and it's going to dump into the right subclavian vein. Okay, the thoracic duct, it does everything else. Okay, and it dumps into the left subclavian vein. So that's how the lymph returns to the bloodstream. So we dump it into the veins. All right, so that's how we collect excess fluid from the tissue. Okay, so here's a picture. It just kind of shows you. Okay, so here's a breast. Okay, here's the axillary lymph node. So the lymph node's in the armpit. Okay, there's more lymph nodes. Okay, so this lymph is going to get drained from here, right? It's going to be filtered through a series of lymph nodes. Okay, and then eventually the lymph will be dumped back into the right subclavian vein. Okay, so it dumps in right here. Now, why did I put this picture here? So most people, when they hear someone with cancer, okay, what they talk about is when they remove a tumor, right, they take a sample of the lymph nodes. They sample the nodes and they biopsy them, and they look for cancer cells. Okay, so the idea is, okay, the lymph nodes, what they do is they are going to filter the lymph. I'm not supposed to say filter. It says filter. Filter the lymph. Okay, and they're going to, the white blood cells in there will hopefully destroy the cancer cells, okay, or the malignant cells. Okay, so if they are successful, okay, there probably is no sign of cancer in the nodes, okay, but if the cancer is metastasized, it's supposed to be a Z. If it's metastasized, I don't know if I spelled that right. If it's metastasized, what happens, right, is that it gets picked up by the lymph nodes, and the lymph nodes can't protect you. Okay, so they try, and they might be overwhelmed by the type of cancer. So wherever they find the cancer in the nodes is an indication of how far the cancer has spread. Okay, and that helps determine what treatment they need to do. Okay, so the mechanisms, how does the lymph actually flow? How does it move? Okay, so it's low pressure and speed, kind of like veins. Okay, so like veins. The lymph vessels are actually contract kind of rhythmically. Okay, so now think about how the veins move blood. Okay, so there's the skeletal muscle pump. So the more you move, the more your lymph flows through the veins. The thoracic pump, so when you breathe, it moves the lymph. And there are also valves. Okay, so the valves are going to prevent backflow. just like in your blood. Okay, now when the blood is actually flowing in the subclavian veins, it's moving really, really fast, and it pulls the lymph into it. So it's kind of like, whoa, it pulls it along. Okay, exercise is going to increase lymphatic return. Okay, so that's going to help your immune system and keep you healthy. Okay, now the primary lymphatic organs are ones that are going to be involved in making and maturing the lymphocytes. Okay, so we have red bone marrow. Okay, so red bone marrow is found in the flat bones of the skull, the vertebrae, the ribs, the sternum, and in the os coccyx, so your hip bones. Okay, now the thymus also has a role to do with the maturation, so it's going to help the T cells mature. Remember that the thymus is this organ that is really large in children. So if you looked at a fetal pig, you would see the thymus because they're fetal, they're really small. And then as we get older, as we age, okay, the thymus shrinks. So the thymus involutes it kind of degrades. Okay, so after puberty, it starts getting smaller. So it's harder to find in the mature cats, right? But we can find it in the pig. So the thymus is really important for T cells to mature. Okay, and that's where the T in thymus comes from. That's where the T in T cells comes from, thymus. I said it backwards. Okay, now, secondary lymphatic organs are just places where the lymphocytes hang out. Okay, so they house them. Okay, so reticular tissue is usually a secondary lymphatic organ. Okay, so reticular tissue, remember that, like the bath sponge, the scrunchy bath sponge. Okay, so it kind of looks, the nylon netting thing. Okay, so there's the framework, and then in that framework, you're going to find the cells. So the cells are in there. Okay, so it's reticular. Okay, lymphatic organs are actually the lymph nodes and the spleen. Okay, so we don't talk about the spleen much, but it's a lymphatic organ. Okay, lymphatic nodules. Okay, so those are bigger than, they're kind of like lymph nodes, okay? They're a little bit bigger. So there's the tonsils, the MALT, which is the mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue, which I just tried to write on the other page. So mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue. Okay, and then there's diffuse lymphatic nodules kind of all throughout the body. So these will be found, MALT is found in the intestines, like where there are openings to the outside, vagina, mouth, okay. Okay, so how does a lymph node work? Okay, so how do they actually work? So here's a picture of them, of one. And I don't expect you to memorize the structure of a lymph node, but what I want you to realize is it's kind of like the kidney. Okay, so the blood can flow into it faster than it actually flows out of it. Okay, so there's lots of ways to get into it. Okay, but there's only one way to get out. So what that does is it slows the flow. Okay, so I have, so what they're going to do is they're going to filter the lymph. They're going to remove unwanted materials that it doesn't recognize as self. Okay, so there's lots of ways to get in, but fewer efferent vessels, so fewer ways to exit. So that's going to slow the movement through. Okay, now inside the lymph node, we're going to find macrophages, reticular cells, lymphocytes. Okay, so they're in there. They're looking for things that are not self, and then they're going to destroy them or tag them for destruction. Okay, so lymph nodes are found. They're all over the place, but there are clusters. Okay, under the armpits, axillary, inguinal in the neck. Okay, so they're clustered there. And then there are also individual ones scattered all throughout your body. Okay, now spleen. The spleen is the largest lymphatic organ. It's found in the upper left quadrant of the abdomen, and it's composed of two types of tissue. So it has white pulp and it has red pulp. The white pulp contains clusters of T cells, B cells, and macrophages. And what the white pulp is going to do is it's going to look for foreign materials and try to destroy them. Okay, now red pulp is red. Okay, so it's got red blood cells, platelets, macrophages, plasma cells, which we'll talk about. And what they're going to do is it's going to engulf and destroy foreign materials. The spleen is also responsible for the breakdown of old red blood cells and platelets, and it serves as a reservoir of platelets, and some people say a reservoir of red blood cells too. But you can survive without a spleen, but you might have some lower immune function for a while.